What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my updated Week 10 top 40 wide receiver rankings, expanding the rankings, adding like 10 to 12 players here. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, feel free to drop them down below. But let's dive right into Tier 1 here. And after the Thursday night game, obviously Jamar Chase not going to be ranked. He would have been in this Tier 1. He was early in the week. I only have a one-man Tier 1 here. It's Justin Jefferson. Solid matchup against the Jaguars. I think at this point, he's kind of separated himself from the field. And that's a good segue to just mention a few players who I'm not ranking based on potential injury. So Nico Collins, heading into week 9, it seemed like he had a good shot to return in week 10. It does not seem like that is the case any longer, so I'm projecting that he misses this week with his hamstring injury. Also do not expect Chris Olave to go with a concussion. And then Keon Coleman also does not seem like he's treading in the right direction with his wrist injury. But now moving into Tier 2, fairly large tier here. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Think he's a solid option. The thing that's always going to hold Amon-Ra St. Brown back this year is just the overall passing volume. Then we have A.J. Brown dealing with this knee injury, but he was a full participant on Thursday, so that's a good sign. We have Cooper Kupp going up against the Dolphins. The Dolphins have actually been a pretty tough matchup for wide receivers. They have allowed the 4th fewest points per game to the position, but Vegas does think the Rams are going to put up points. They have the 3rd highest implied point total. Then we have Malik Nabers going up against the Panthers, and Nabers hasn't been as great since returning from the concussion. I think a lot of it is due to the offensive line. Obviously, the quarterback play is not ideal. He is still getting peppered with targets, 24 in his last 2, but I like this matchup here against the Panthers. I think the Giants can actually put up points, against a weaker defense, and I think Nabers will have a nice bounce back. Then I have Tyreek Hill going up against the Rams. In his last 2 games with Tua, since Tua's been back, he has gone 6 for 72, 4 for 80. He's been fine, nothing crazy, still kind of looking for that breakout nuclear game. Then I have Garrett Wilson, solid matchup here against the Cardinals. And I do think at this point, he's kind of separated himself from Davante Adams through 3 games. In his 3 games with Adams, he has put up 13.1, 16.3, and 30 PPR points. Obviously, just an insane game in week 9. 2 one-handed touchdowns, really seeming like Davante Adams coming in has kind of opened some things up for him. Then 2 more guys here. We have Puka Nacua going up against the Dolphins. The Puka Nacua experience has been a little bit frustrating because obviously he's been injured. Then he returns from injury. You're not sure if you should play him. It seems like he might be limited. Then he has a great game. You're like, all right, we're going to throw him back into your lineup. He heads into that one injured. The injury's fine, but then he ends up getting ejected. So it's been a little bit rough. I do think you can rely on Puka Nacua here in your lineup this week. And then the final guy in this tier is Terry McLaurin. Not a great matchup here against the Steelers, but I do think Terry will be fine. Super consistent outside of his first 2 rough games. 13 plus PPR points in 7 straight. Now moving into Tier 3, going to start off this tier with just 4 straight dudes dealing with injuries. We have Drake London, who is day-to-day with his hip injury. I believe he was a limited participant. We have Devonta Smith, who's dealing with a hamstring injury. He was a full participant on Thursday. We have CeeDee Lamb, who is dealing with a shoulder injury and has Dak out, which is obviously why he's lower than usual. And then we have Deebo Samuel, who is dealing with an oblique and rib injury, and he has been limited this week. I would lean towards all of those dudes playing, but obviously just situations to monitor. Then I have Tank Dell, and he is someone that I moved up from my rankings earlier in the week, obviously with the idea that Nico Collins is no longer going to play. It's a nice matchup here going up against the Lions. They've allowed the 3rd most points per game to the wide receiver position. He's coming off his best game of the season in week 9, where he went 6 for 126. I'm someone who has been a believer in the talent of Tank Dell. I think this is a nice opportunity in a nice matchup. I think he's a solid play this week. Then I have Davante Adams going up against the Cardinals. Like I talked about with Garrett Wilson, Wilson has been the more productive wide receiver in all 3 of their games. Davante Adams was under 10 PPR points in the first 2. Finally had a solid game in week 9, 22.1. I still think there should be some distance between him and Garrett Wilson, but in this fairly favorable matchup, I do think Adams is a nice play. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Josh Downs going up against the Bills. Production-wise, I think Josh Downs has 100% emerged as the wide receiver 1 here. I'll talk about Pittman much later in this video, but whatever back issue, injury he's dealing with, he has not been the same player. Josh Downs has been the clear top dog, maybe not in terms of routes and his overall snaps, but in terms of production, He is by far the best wide receiver in that offense. And then moving into tier 4 here, we're going to start off with George Pickens going up against the Commanders. He's had 2 solid games with Russell Wilson at quarterback, 5 for 111 and a touchdown, 4 for 74. He's being used down the field. We know he has that big play upside. Solid mid-tier wide receiver 2 play this week. Then I have Ladd McConkey going up against the Titans. I'm really high on Ladd McConkey. Early on in the season, he was doing, great with limited opportunities just based on the low passing volume. Ever since the bye week, the Chargers have gone way more pass heavy. They're relying on Justin Herbert, which is in turn, really boosting Ladd McConkey's production. Then after Ladd, we have a faller from early in the week. It's Brian Thomas Jr. Now, I thought this was a really nice spot for BTJ. You're dealing with the chest injury last week, still dealing with that in practice, but it was a nice matchup here against the Vikings. They're one of the more favorable matchups for opposing wide receivers. But now it looks like Trevor Lawrence is going to be out this week and could potentially be out for the rest of the season. It seems like that's, a potential outcome here. So that is not ideal. I did have to bump him down a little bit here. I still think he's playable with Mac Jones. I could see with the backup coming in, they want to kind of force feed their top weapon here. So I don't think he's unplayable, but I do think, not having Trevor Lawrence is going to be a hit to him. Then I have D-Hop going up against the Broncos, and D-Hop this low is really just due to the concern of the Pat Surtain matchup. He's coming off a monster game, 9 targets, 8 for 86, 2 touchdowns. I am just worried about Surtain potentially shadowing him in this matchup. Then I have Darnell Mooney going up against the Saints, 18 PPR points in back-to-back games. I will say that if Drake London looks like he's going to miss this game, I would definitely jump up Darnell Mooney a decent amount. But I do think as the wide receiver 2, if Drake London is healthy, he's more in like this fringe wide receiver 2 area. After Mooney, going to go with Khalil Shakir, and he's actually someone to monitor just based on the injuries around him. It's possible, even though I do have Amari Cooper ranked, there's no guarantee he plays this week. And even if he does play, there's no guarantee it's like a full set of snaps. And then Keon Coleman doesn't seem like he's trending in the right direction to play. So Khalil Shakir, he's been a very safe option. I do think he could be in store for a decent amount of volume this week, just based on the injuries around him. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Courtland Sutton going up against the Chiefs. It's not a great matchup, but in back-to-back games, he has been targeted 10 or more times and has had 100-plus receiving yards in both of them. So it seems like him and Bo Nix starting to build that chemistry, figure some things out here. Even in a tough matchup, I still think he is a decent play. Now looking at tier 5, kind of an interesting mix of guys here. The first one is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. He has just been super boom or bust, and in a tough matchup, he does not seem like the best play. The Jets have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game, but compared to like pretty much everyone ranked below him, he probably does have one of, if not the highest ceilings out there. After Marvin Harrison Jr., going to go with Amari Cooper going up against the Colts. Like I said, he's dealing with that wrist injury. He missed week 9. I will say, like, the one thing that could be holding him back here, he talked about how it's like a pain tolerance thing, which is somewhat concerning because what if he gets out there, he's playing, he feels fine, and he gets hit, all of a sudden he's taken out. Also, if he hasn't been able to like fully practice with everyone, is he going to be stepping into like that full workload? Because I think this would be his 3rd game or no, 4th game with the team potentially. And at that point, you would think, all right, like he's going to have settled in to solid usage, but he didn't have that like 3rd game as a stepping stone. So still some uncertainty there. Hopefully he can get healthy and really kind of work his way in. After Cooper, going to go with Jordan Addison going up against the Jags. The Vikings number 2 target, but it's a nice matchup here. 5th in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. And then the last guy in this tier, Calvin Ridley. I mean, he went on a stretch of just miserable production, but over the last 2 weeks, he has gone 10 for 143, 5 for 73. It seems like Will Levis might be, taken back over a quarterback. I don't really think there's a massive difference between him and Mason Rudolph, so not a major concern for me. Neither quarterback is going to give you great quarterback play. Now moving into tier 6, some interesting, I guess, like younger, unproven options, and then a couple of disappointing veterans so far. So we're going to start off with Jalen Waddle. He's been straight up bad in the games with and without Tua. It's pretty unfortunate because he had like 3 seasons, 2 of them with Tyreek Hill and Tua, of like proven production, solid like back end fantasy wide receiver 1 through fantasy wide receiver 2. It hasn't happened so far. I'm not willing to totally give up on it because it's like a 3-game sample size. and he's had 2 bad games, so 2 as the starter, but it's certainly not an ideal situation. Then after Waddle, I'm going to go with DJ Moore going up against the Patriots. He's really kind of stalled, less than 8 PPR points in each of his last 3 games. There just seems to be something off here with him on this offense. The vibes are just not great out of Chicago with him as a Chicago Bears fan. And then on that same offense, going to go with Rome Odunze here going up against the Patriots. I feel like we're in this spot where Keenan Allen looking kind of washed. DJ Moore, who knows what's going on with that situation. Rome Odunze, week 9, 5 for 104. This could be a spot where Rome Odunze starts to kind of, prove himself, potentially elevate to the wide receiver 1 here rest of season. I don't think that's out of the question. Then after those 2 Bears, we're going to go with Jawan Jennings going up against the Buccaneers. Now, he is dealing with a hip injury, but I think this is a pretty interesting spot. We saw early on in the season, he had like that monster game where I can't remember if it was Debo or Ayuk. I think it was Debo, missed a game. Jawan Jennings stepped in, went completely nuclear. Now he's going to have the opportunity likely to have the inside shot to be the wide receiver 2. You're going to have Ricky Pearsall kind of working his way in, but if Jennings is healthy, he probably should be lined into that wide receiver 2 spot. We'll see what he can do with it. It's a nice matchup here against the Bucs. Then I have Demario Douglas going up against the Bears. He has played in 2 healthy games where he's been healthy. Drake May has been healthy, played the whole game. In both of those matchups, he has 9 targets. So clearly him and Drake May have some chemistry. He's trying to get him the ball. An interesting option, even though it is a tough matchup. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Jameson Williams. If JMO was not suspended and we were just picking up from 2 weeks ago, before he had to miss the 2 games, he probably would be ranked higher here. I'm just not positive he's going to be launched right back into the same role. Now, he definitely could, but it's not like this Lions offense has been really struggling without him. They really haven't missed a beat. So that's my concern with JMO, but he still does have that big play upside. It's not like you're relying on him to get 10 targets a game. You're just relying on him to turn one of his targets into a 50-yard touchdown. That's really the hope if you are playing JMO, but it does seem like the floor is going to be a little bit lower if that usage is up in the air. And then the final tier here, tier 7, I guess some interesting names. Wouldn't love playing these dudes, but for whatever reason this season, the wide receiver position, not in a great spot. So we're going to start it off with the Panthers wide receivers, Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker. Xavier Legette had his usage, I guess, somewhat dropped in week 8, but then it bounced back up in week 9. It was the opposite for Coker, where it looked like Coker had overtaken Legette, actually outproduced him, had a great game, but then his production fell back down. Legette has scored touchdowns in 4 of his last 5 healthy games. I think Coker will see an uptick in usage with the Mingo trade. One just odd piece of info here with this Panthers offense, David Moore, I believe is the dude's name. He is running starting wide receiver routes, which just seems crazy. You have these young players. It shouldn't be Legette or Coker getting starting wide receiver routes. It should probably be both of them, and David Moore should probably not be getting that much usage, but it is what it is. I think both these rookies have proven they have some talent, so could be interesting plays. Then I have Xavier Worthy going up against the Broncos. I was someone who liked Worthy heading into the season. I mean, this is really, it seems like he's drawing dead a little bit here. Week 9, -1 point. It started off looking like, oh my gosh, he just scored this touchdown. It's going to be a great game. Ends up being out of bounds. Not a great job at getting the feet in. And then he has negative 10-yard rush. And then after that, just nothing. So it's not great. His floor is very low. The one reason why I'm somewhat optimistic about him in this game, I mean, he's my wide receiver 36, so I'm not getting crazy, but the fact that D-Hop could be shadowed by Surtain, I think that is interesting for Worthy, where maybe this could be one of those spots where he hits a deep touchdown. Then after Worthy, going to go with Wan'Dale Robinson going up against the Panthers. This was his worst game of the season in week 9, the first game where he scored under 8 PPR points, so that floor is starting to get a little shaky, but solid matchup, fringe wide receiver 3. Then I have Quentin Johnston going up against the Titans. Had a big week 9, 4 for 118 and a touchdown. QJ has actually been in this interesting spot where he's had multiple touchdowns just on complete blown coverage. And I guess you could attribute that to him, his great route running, but I really think it has just been completely blown coverages. So he's had some big games. Don't think his floor is super high week to week, but if you're desperate, could be playable. has Herbert as his quarterback. Then after Johnston, going to go with Ricky Pearsall going up against the Bucks. Like I talked about, Jawan Jennings probably should be the wide receiver 2 there, but I think Ricky Pearsall can definitely work in, can be used in creative ways. We saw before the bye, he had like a 40-yard touchdown run. So interesting opportunity here. If he is talented enough, he can carve out a role. And then the final guy here, mentioned him earlier on, Michael Pittman going up against the Bills. I do think he is just being extremely limited with his back injury, not necessarily in terms of his usage, route, snaps, but in terms of his actual production. In the last 2 games, he has been targeted 10 times. He has only caught 2 of those targets and turned that into 30 yards. I do think he's at risk of potentially missing some time, maybe going on IR. There was that report a couple of weeks ago that he was likely going to go on IR with a back injury, and then all of a sudden he was back at practice playing the next week. The production is not there, and if they're rolling him out as a starter, he's hurt and he's not producing, what's the incentive of having him play through it? Seems like you should probably just wait for him to get healthy. And then an honorable mention to Keenan Allen, not overly high on him, but can't say we have a clear picture on all these Bears wide receivers. That's going to wrap it up for my top 40 this week. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.